when solar astrophysicists created their models, they ignored thermodynamics. Now, this is going to sound ridiculous because, well, yeah, it sounds ridiculous that they should ignore one of the most basic things when it comes to science in general and physics. So I'm going to go ahead and break this down Barney style for my listeners. What you have here is the Zeroth law of thermodynamics. If you have a temperature of A equaling a temperature of B, and you have a temperature of B equaling a temperature of C, what you have, as you guessed it, that means C equals A. And the entire system is in thermodynamic equilibrium, meaning they're all the same temperature. What mainstream astronomers have done to make their stellar structure equations work, in other words, they force-fitted and they ignored reality, is they said, well, the sun is also in local thermodynamic equilibrium. And as you saw with my previous example, that means A equals the temperature of B equals the temperature of C. Okay? So basically what they're saying is you measure a temperature of this, and you measure the temperature of this, and those should equal, which should equal also the temperature of this. Okay? But only one problem. This is supposedly millions of degrees Kelvin. This is also millions of degrees Kelvin. And this is only 6,000, or 5880 Kelvin. See where they messed up? The equations for stellar structure assume stars to be in local thermodynamic equilibrium. You don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to go ahead and link this Wikipedia stuff to the bottom of this video, and you'll see there where they claim a star is in local thermodynamic equilibrium. They claim that the temperature of the central structure of the star equals the surface, which equals the outside of the star where it's radiating. Which is very, very, very strange. I'm going to go ahead and give you your money's worth. Instead of having pseudoscience, we can go ahead and fix this problem. They assume that they know what the internal parts of the sun are, even though they have no observations of it. No observations of the internal structure of stars. Believe it or not, they don't have any observations of young stars like the sun. This is the sun. The only observations they really have are on the surface. So it's 5880 Kelvin, and they have observations of the corona, which is around, what, 20 million Kelvin at some point, some places. So being that they have no observations, that can be any temperature you want it to be. And stellar metamorphosis, stellar meta, you have, if it's really, 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 really hot out here, then it gets colder, and then you have even colder things called sunspots where they're only 3,000 degrees Kelvin. That means, well, natural philosophy, that means the temperature drops off as you go more towards the interior components of the star. Meaning, we don't really need observations. All we need to do is reason. It's really hot out here, it gets colder, and there's a hole in the star where it's really cold. Chances are the internal structure of the star is very, very cold. Now I know there are a lot of people who are going to be up in arms about this, but as well, it is an Occam's razor. So establishment science, here is the distance from interior, okay, but just another one down here, distance from interior, and then you have your temperature on this in Kelvin, okay? I'm not going to put the units on there, you can just imagine those. They're both even for both graphs to show the point. But In establishment, what they do is they say the temperature is really hot in the very center, and then it drops down to the surface, really cold, it gets back up again, where the corona is, and it goes back down cold again, where interstellar space is. This is the corona, and this is the surface. Okay? This is complex, okay? Chances are we can ignore it. Now, in stellar meta, what you actually have, as I pointed out earlier, is actually really cold in the center. And it goes up from the surface, keeps on going up, and then it goes back down again to interstellar space. So what you have is the surface right here. You have the interior, you have your corona, and you have outer space. As we can see, the problem is with establishment is they assume that this graph is there without any observations, and which counters natural philosophy. If you have the object really hot, or really cold, really hot, and it gets really cold again as you go towards the center. But what they do is really cold, really hot, really cold, really hot, and they're all over the place. This would be what's called another Occam's razor. It's where the simplest explanation is probably the more correct one. Now, for another talk in the future, I'm going to go over what happens to the star. Now, mind you, the majority of the heat is on the surface, okay? But as it cools and dies and shrinks, the star, its heat, moves towards the center as it gravitationally collapses. And that means that since the outer heat diminishes, it will slowly dim. And this shell will contract. And it will continue contracting until eventually the star stops shining. And famously, you'll have astronomers calling them planets. All right, I think that really sums up this talk. Basic thermodynamics falsifies the fusion model of stars. I can't be too proud of that, but if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.